Hey, what's up, Shoot Extraordinary Conference? I hope that you guys are having an amazing day learning, growing, and becoming extraordinary here with our amazing Lensbaby speakers. Up next, we're going to sit and spend some time with Dana Leigh. Dana, how are you, my friend?
Doing great. Thank you.
Yes,
Thanks for having me.
of course. You're more than welcome. Tell us a little bit briefly about your journey into Lensbaby and what we can expect in your class today.
Okay, so about 10 years ago, maybe a little less than that, I was introduced to Lensbaby and by a well-known photographer, Emma Wood. She was one of my first photography teachers, and she introduced Lensbaby to me. And my journey has just been one of exploring and creating and learning how to use these lenses. A little bit about me, I'm from Portland, Oregon, and I have 5 kids, and so I'm, in the middle right now of homeschooling all of them because of the pandemic and just trying to find ways to continue to be artistic and create art. And I am a portrait and fine art photographer. And again, I've been doing this for about a little over 10 years.
Awesome. Tell us a little bit about what we can expect in your course coming up.
So my course is called Emotive Portraiture, and it's all about creating portraits that are emotive and infused with mood and really how to pull emotion out of a moment or out of your subject and to create from a place of depth and purpose and just create things that really resonate with you as the artist.
Wow, that's really beautiful. And I think one of the things that we have as photographers is the ability to step into that and to leverage our art and the things that we do as creatives to tell that kind of story. And I'm super excited. Shoot Extraordinary Conference, this is one that you don't want to miss. We're going to get started right now. And then Dana, we will see you for the Q&A after.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. Let's do this, guys.
Hello, my name is Dana Leigh, and today I will be sharing my process of creating emotive portraits. For each of these sessions, I will be using my Canon 5D Mark IV and my Lensbaby Spark 2.0 with a Sweet 35 optic. So, let's talk emotive portraiture. According to the Webster's Dictionary, the definition of emotive is to arouse intense feelings. The definition of portraiture is the making of portraits. So to put it simply, emotive portraiture is a portrait of your subject that makes you feel something or evokes emotion. My favorite quote is by David Allen Henry that you saw just a few moments ago. He said, "Don't shoot what it looks like, shoot what it feels like." This is my mission every time I pick up my camera. I love that a photo has the power to make us feel something. The emotion in an image is what connects us and pulls us into that moment. As artists and photographers, portraits are about so much more than simply capturing a picture of somebody. Portraiture is an artistic expression of that person or the artist photographing them. Sometimes we bring our subject's likeness or personality to a photo. Other times as artists, we infuse our own creative vision into a moment that communicates our deeper emotions and brings them to life. This area of my home is a common place I take portraits of my kids because I love the light and the reflections I can get in the slider door. I am constantly looking for reflective surfaces to include in my portrait work because they help add so much interest. Also because of the symbolism often associated with reflections. I think reflections are a great way to help tell a story. I absolutely love using Lensbaby for portraits because of the dreamy blur these lenses produce. Here, I had just pulled my new Spark 2.0 and Sweet 35 out of the box, and I was working on getting the hang of focusing and shifting the blur. For these images, I am shooting wide open at f2.5. I love how the blur allows you to isolate your subject and the rest of the scene you are shooting is blurred. Lensbaby Blur is a wonderful way to add depth, mystery, and visual interest to your portraits. In these portraits, I love that my daughter is in focus and her reflection falls off into an ethereal or dreamlike blur. And here are a few of my favorites I captured from this short session next to this slider door. Next, I am going to photograph my daughter at this big puddle over at my next door neighbor's house. I love that this puddle reflects the sky and the tops of the tall evergreen trees. Going back to creative portraiture, it's important to note that there are several different approaches one can take in portrait photography. There are more classic approaches such as headshots in a studio. You can take more of an environmental approach where you use your surroundings to speak to your subject's identity or interests. Or you can take more of a constructionist approach, which is how I tend to approach portraiture. To quote study.com, they say a constructionist approach to portraiture is all about building emotion and developing atmosphere. The photographer may choose to set the mood of the portrait through the background, lighting, and person's body language to build a conveyed emotion, end quote. I'm doing this here by trying to create a sense of wonder as my daughter sits at the edge of this puddle and the beauty of nature is reflected in the water. When taking portraits, I aim to include the following 4 elements, which all help me build a creative vision for what I'm hoping to capture. These 4 elements are light, emotion, movement, and story. These 4 things play off of each other and help me to tap into my creativity and to start asking questions about the image I want to create. Sometimes I will give up one of these elements, but you can usually see all 4 in my work. Movement is one I will give up if the story I am trying to tell is one of stillness or wonder, as an example. So with light, I ask myself, what kind of mood do I want to create in my image and which type of lighting will help me do that? For emotion, I ask myself, what word would I associate with this light? What emotion do I feel right now? How can I pull that emotion out of my subject? For movement, I ask myself, what actions can my subject do that back up the emotion I am aiming for? And story, what story do I see and what story do I want to tell? Lensbaby lenses allow me to infuse all of the emotion I'm wanting to capture into a moment. These lenses pair so well with the carefree and energetic nature of childhood. They add that little extra something special to all 4 of the elements I was discussing. For light, they create a beautiful swirly bokeh. For emotion, the blur adds so much mood to an image. And with movement and story, the small area of focus allows me to draw attention to the movement or the story I am trying to tell within the frame. My daughter will never turn down an opportunity to jump or splash in a puddle. So when taking photos near a puddle or if you're trying to achieve reflections near water, there are a few tips I'd like to offer. The first one is to shoot from above to reflect the sky, treetops, buildings, or whatever it is that's reflected in the water. The second one is to frame your subject between the reflections. So here I'm pointing out to my daughter where the trees are and the area that I want her to be standing or spinning or jumping so that I can frame her within the reflection of the trees. My third tip is to tell a story by encouraging your subject to engage with their surroundings. You can do this by having them jump or spin, as I'm doing here. They can reach for something or sit low to touch something in the water. Anything you can do to get your subjects to engage with their surroundings really helps you to tell a story and brings those reflections to life. Once again, I'm using my Spark 2.0 and my Lensbaby Suite 35, and I am shooting at f2.5 with an exposure time of 1/400, and my ISO is at 400. So I make sure that my shutter speed is fast enough to really capture the movement of her twirls. With Lensbaby, I'm going to talk more about focusing in a bit, but I have her stand really still, and then I lock focus on an area of her dress or near her arm because I'm trying to really hone in on the twirl of her skirt and have everything else blurred. So I lock my focus on an area of her dress. I'll have her stand still for a second, and then I'll have her spin, and I rapid fire. And honestly, sometimes I'm just crossing my fingers hoping I got one in focus. Going back to the elements I was talking about, this is a bit of a flat light, and really you can photograph anything in this sort of lighting, but it is a really good type of light to photograph reflections. The mood or emotion I'm wanting to capture is a sense of wonder. And so along with that, I'm having her kneel at the edge or bend down at the edge of this puddle. And I love that the reflection of the trees, it's almost like it's another world. And so I loved the idea of having her reach out and barely with just one finger touching the water as if to disrupt that dream world that she is sitting at the edge of. And so that's just an example of how I like to really infuse an emotion into the moment I'm capturing and use it to tell a story. And now we've arrived at the moment she's been waiting for, which is to jump and splash and just go a bit nuts with the water. And so I had her jump, and my last tip for photographing this sort of reflection is to shoot low, to get lower. So I'm shooting from above right now, and I'm gonna step off of the step stool and get really low down at her feet level. And I am focusing in on the splashes coming off of her boots. And shooting low like this is just a great way to hone in on the details, to tell a story by selectively focusing on a detail and letting the rest kind of fade off into a blur. It took me quite a few tries to get one in focus, but I was happy with the few shots I got of her splashing in the water. And here are a few of my favorites from this session. My front door is one of my favorite spots to photograph my children. There is a real symbolism of a front door that I try to incorporate into my work and storytelling, especially during this past year as we have spent more time than ever here in our home. There is a real dichotomy of the world outside our front door during this pandemic and all of the fear and unknown that comes with that. And then the safety, togetherness, as well as the challenges we have endured as a family on this side of the threshold. On this morning, it was really foggy outside, so I love that the fog served as a nice backdrop to help me create some really moody images. Now let's talk Lensbaby focusing. I have always used a Composer Pro 2, so I am new to the Spark 2.0. For this session, I'm using the Spark, and I'm going to be honest and say that I have had moments of frustration trying to nail focus, but the challenge keeps me going. Lensbaby lenses are designed to bend, which produces a tilt shift effect. Whichever way you tilt your lens is the direction your slice of focus will fall in the frame. If you tilt to the right, your focus falls on the right side of the frame. To the left, and your focus moves to the left. When first starting out with a Lensbaby, I recommend not tilting your lens at all, but instead keeping it centered. This is a great way to nail focus easier and adjust to using a creative tilt shift lens. Because you focus these lenses manually, it can make focusing tricky. I recommend shooting at a narrow aperture as you adjust to shooting with these lenses. As you get more comfortable finding the sweet spot or the slice of focus, you can start shooting with wider apertures. Another tip I would like to offer when focusing with a Lensbaby Composer Pro 2 is to focus and unfocus the focus ring several times before you take the shot. I do this so that I can check and double check the sharpness of my focus. Using this technique will allow you to clearly see when you have found the narrow slice of focus present with a Lensbaby. When you feel you have found the sweet spot of focus, press the shutter. With a spark, you can do a similar technique, but instead squeeze the neck of the lens all the way into the camera to exaggerate the blurriness and slowly release the lens until you see your sweet spot of focus appear. Repeat this a couple times before hitting the shutter. When shooting with the Lensbaby, I almost always use the live view mode versus the viewfinder. It's just easier for me to see if I'm shooting in focus on my live view screen versus trying to squint my eyes and find the focus through the tiny viewfinder. For this session, I'm shooting at an aperture of f2.5, a shutter speed of 1/160, and an ISO of 800. You can see here that I am shooting her reflection in the mirror, and I'm using the edge of the mirror closest to my camera and the flowers in that vase to frame her. And for these images, I am exposing for the sky behind her to create more of a silhouette. So she's silhouetted and you can see the fog and the trees coming through the fog behind her, which you'll see in the final images. I love getting creative with Lensbaby lenses. I will often shoot through objects like a Ziploc or flower petals, and I also will sometimes ask an assistant, my oldest daughter is assisting me here, to create movement across the frame right in front of my lens. We have tried using a spray bottle, a garden hose, and one of my favorite things to use is bubbles. Bubbles are true to the story of childhood and are a really fun way to add a whimsical touch to a portrait. Blowing bubbles across the frame creates a fun effect by framing my daughter in bubbles. A lot of it is luck with where the bubbles land and how they frame your subject. But I love the quirky and different results I get each time I try this. To get a different variety of shots, you can try narrowing your aperture. If you are shooting with strong backlight, this creates starbursts or lens flares on the bubbles as they go across your frame. You can also slow down your shutter speed to get an intentional motion blur. The opportunities for creativity are truly endless with these lenses. One question I get asked often is how I get my kids to pose or to allow me to take pictures of them. And my girls really enjoy doing this with me because I allow them to collaborate with me to help me come up with ideas. I try my best to keep sessions as short as possible so that I'm not exhausting them, and so that next time when I ask them to do a session with me, they remember that it's probably going to be a short, quick event and it's not going to take too much time out of their day. I also encourage anyone who enjoys taking portraits or pictures of your own children to take the time to explain to them why it is that you love to take their photos. For me, I love to take pictures because it's my way of really spotlighting and noticing the beauty within our day, no matter how mundane or simple our day may be. Looking through a camera lens allows me to look a little closer at all we have to be thankful for. And the simple act of explaining to my children why it is that I love to take photos has helped them embrace this hobby of mine. I also have made a habit of showing them the end results so that they can be a part of the full creative process and see where our ideas took us and what the end results were. So here are my favorite images that I captured. towards the end of the day, I wanted to get some images outdoors. I was hoping to take photos for this conference in a location with a beautiful backdrop and some golden light as the sun was setting. It had been raining for weeks in the Pacific Northwest by this point, and it was really foggy and gloomy on this particular day. My girls and I decided to just roll with the weather and set out on an adventure anyway. We found this old logging road near our home, and I was determined to make the best of the weather I had to work with. The silver lining to all of this fog is that it helped me create a very high-key look to these images. The background is bright white and blown out, and those sort of images translate really well to black and white. For this part of the session, I switched my lens to the Composer Pro 2 with a Sweet 50. I prefer this focal length for close-up portraits. Since I am discussing different Lensbaby optic options, I wanted to address a question I am commonly asked, which is, how does the optic swap system work? You can put any of the interchangeable optics, which are either the Sweet or the Edge optics, into your choice of two different lens bodies, which are the Composer Pro 2 or the Spark 2.0. Both of these lens bodies allow you the freedom to place your focus anywhere in the frame with a simple tilt and swivel of your lens. The Sweet optics happen to be my favorite because of the subtle blur and the creative control I have with the sweet spot of focus by simply adjusting the aperture. My favorite way to add depth and interest to a portrait is to incorporate movement. I do this by having my subjects toss their hair or move their dress as they walk. With my Lensbaby optics, I add interest by getting creative with the blur. Lensbaby blur creates a sense of movement even without any intentional movement present. I love the way the blurred edges make the light appear as if it's dancing around my subject. For these portraits, I took a couple images of my daughter with her face in focus, and then tilted my lens to focus on her hair and made her face blurry. By changing where you focus, you get a variety of images and can change the whole mood and story of what you're capturing. You can see here I'm using my focusing technique where I'm blurring the focus ring and then focusing, blur, and focus, and then I take the shot. And here are my favorites from this part of our session. Next up, I wanted to get a few images of my daughters walking down this road with the fog and the tall trees as a backdrop. This image of my girls walking away from me ended up being my favorite from this session. I tell you that because I almost didn't take this shot. I was putting a lot of pressure on myself to figure out my new spark and get the focusing down, and it wasn't coming easily to me. After beating myself up a bit internally and getting some encouragement from my girls, my youngest daughter saw my frustration and actually said out loud, "You can do this, Mom." In that moment, I decided to ditch my own notion of perfection, because what is perfection anyway? And I intentionally blurred the whole scene of my girls walking away from me to create more of an in-camera painterly look. I'm so glad that I pushed past my own self-doubt and limitations I was setting on myself and just took some shots and created something that I ended up being really proud of. And here are a couple of my favorites. This was the moment I saw the beautiful sunset we were about to witness. The fog lifted and the most gorgeous light was cutting through and creating these beautiful light rays. It was absolutely breathtaking. Shooting during golden hour and backlighting my subject is probably my favorite type of light to shoot in. So I'd love to offer some backlighting tips. Backlight is when your light source is behind your subject, or your subject is between you and the light source. This is one of my favorite types of light because there are so many ways to get creative with backlight. One of the ways I love to use backlight is to create rim light. Rim lighting happens when your subject is backlit and blocking the light source. A rim of light can be seen outlining the shape of your subject. This type of light is the most visible when there is a dark backdrop behind your subject. You can see here that the light is illuminating everything behind my daughter, and I'm shooting low enough that I'm using her to block the light to get the rim lighting around her. I loved the whole mood of this moment with the fog and the beautiful light behind her, so I'm again trying to incorporate some movement into the frame with getting her to toss her hair. I'm all about a good hair toss, and I have my subjects do that all the time. I also had her spin a bit, just anything I could think of to try to incorporate some movement to really help infuse some emotion into what I was capturing. When I'm in nature, I feel a real sense of freedom and awe and just wonder at the world around me, and so that is what I was trying to capture here. Another way I like to use backlight is by creating a lens flare. You can create a lens flare when you shoot towards the light with a narrow aperture. I also wanted to use a narrow aperture here because we had the light rays from the fog coming through the trees, and I wanted to capture those in this portrait. For these images, I'm shooting at f11. Remember that when you change your aperture, you will also need to adjust your ISO to compensate for less light getting into your sensor. When creating a starburst or a lens flare, move your body position so that the light barely peeks over your subject. Remember that you are in control of harnessing the light and can decide how you will use the light based on your camera settings and your shooting perspective. A couple tricks I've learned when creating lens flare is that number one, it's not easy shooting directly into the sun and nailing your focus. It helps me to cup my hand over the front of my lens, lock focus, remove my hand, and then press the shutter. Second, if you squint your eyes while looking through the viewfinder, you can see exactly where the lens flare will be in your frame. If the flare is going directly through your subject, adjust your position a bit until you like where the flare is landing. Another way I like to get creative with this sort of strong backlight is to incorporate water. I will put water, a little bit of water in a Ziploc and put that around my lens and shoot through that. I will also sometimes spray a water bottle onto my lens, just a few drops, and it creates just a really cool bokeh when you're shooting in strong backlight. I put a few drops of water on my lens for a couple of these shots, and you'll see in my final images coming up that it just created a cool and kind of funky lens flare and just something different. I love exploring new ideas and new ways to harness the light. The results aren't always my favorite, but for me, it's not always about getting an award-winning shot every time I have my camera out. I just love to create, and I find joy in the creative process. My number one Lensbaby rule is to embrace the imperfections. I love the way these lenses allow me to tap into my creativity and pull me away from my tendency to be a perfectionist. And here are a few of the images that I captured. And the sun is dipping below these trees, and I'm ending this session with just a few more portraits of my oldest daughter. So again, I'm trying to incorporate the 4 elements that I try to include in my portraiture, which is light, emotion, movement, and story. So the light that I'm using is beautiful backlight, which you can see here. And the words that I think of when I'm shooting in this sort of light, at least in this moment, was just a real sense of calm and peace, inner peace with the fog and the light cutting through the trees. And so I had her just look straight ahead with very little movement to incorporate that emotion and pair it with the light and to really tell a story. I know that this year has been hard for so many of us. 2020 has brought a lot of challenges our way, and it's not an easy season to be creative. I've talked to a lot of friends who are artists that feel pretty unmotivated to create anything right now. I know it's been said, and I fully agree, that now is the time when this world needs our art, our stories, our songs, our creative works. I believe that art heals, and I know that it has been a really important outlet for me personally during this past year. One of my favorite authors is Elizabeth Gilbert, and I love her quote that says, "Define creativity, follow your curiosity." As artists, we are often held back by our own fear. The fear of trying something new, the fear of failing, fear of being misunderstood. I think we are often the ones standing in our own way. Letting go of perfection and fear and following my curiosity often leads me to a place of creativity that truly feeds my soul. It allows me to create from a place of depth that is authentic and meaningful to me as an artist. A painter paints a canvas and creates with intention. From brush size to paint color, her masterpiece is about bringing her vision to life. The same thing rings true for us as photographers. We can bring forth a certain mood or emotion by intentional choices with compositional elements, lens choice, and light. These deeper themes and emotions start within us, and it's up to us to be brave enough to bring our ideas and our artistry and infuse that into our emotive portraiture.
Dreamy artistic images.
Emotive and soulful imagery.
That extra dimension and quirkiness.
Really unique images.
Se olvidaron completamente.
Extraordinary results.
Creamy bokeh and a dreamy feel.
Creative and quirky landscapes.
Unique blur effect.
Fun flares.
Poetic, oniric look.
Something extraordinary.
Wow, shoot extraordinary conference. Dana, in the comments, they say it all. This is fire. This is the best presentation of the day. It's so much love and admiration for you right now, and coming from me and our interaction and building this thing and knowing that you played such a pivotal role in helping me kind of figure out how to navigate this. You're incredible on all levels.
Thank you.
First and foremost, thank you for that. Shoot Extraordinary Conference. Please leave a comment. If you have a question for Dana, now is the time, put it in there. We'll spend a time here in this Q&A. And wow, I know as a photographer, my journey of stepping into this place of emotional vulnerability in photography took a very long time to develop. And the end, I think, was so palatable for not only me, but I imagine everyone watching, because there is this place where you have to be willing to see what's on the other side of something uncomfortable. Tell us a little bit about just your mindset in stepping into the way that you create.
Well, I think I had to really, get really introspective with myself about my own shortcomings. Like, I like to really understand something and know the rules and follow the rules and make sure that I'm doing it right and it's presented the right way and it's received the right way. I've kind of checked all the boxes. And I think that's an important part of learning photography, is learning the rules. But then there was a real season that I had to step into of also learning and embracing how to break them. And So for me personally, that was about letting go of the perfection, of the perfect compositions, of the perfect focus, and really getting to a place where if the art that I was creating was resonating with me, that I could let the rest of maybe the boxes that weren't checked go. And that was a really big part of me stepping from a photographer who puts a lens on a camera to an artist that creates from a deeper, more meaningful place.
Yeah, and that's really beautiful and powerful. And in the beginning, I think that stepping on that path and heading towards that trajectory can be cumbersome, right? Because you're in this place of learning and discovering who you are as an artist.
Yeah.
What was it like for you as you first started down that path?
I think you mean just the path of
being willing to be emotionally vulnerable with yourself as a creative.
I think just getting to a place where I had put in the time and put in the practice of learning all the things. And that's the one thing about photography, you never stop learning. So there is no like final place that you arrive. But getting to a place where I felt like I had kind of put in the time to learn the craft, and then, you know, just asking myself what more I wanted from this outlet that I had with the camera and these lenses, these Lensbabies. What did that outlet mean to me, and what could I infuse into, you know, this, you know, these tools to create something that was vulnerable and that was telling a story and really coming from that deep place that I was talking about.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And they are so much of a tool, and not necessarily even used for the purpose of only creating, but helping to inspire. And we've had multiple people ask over the course of your class, what's your favorite Lensbaby?
Everyone always says it's like picking a favorite kid. But I have a really big place in my heart for the Sweet Optics. I started with the Sweet 50, and so that is still my favorite. It's a great focal length for portraits. I just added the Sweet 35. Actually, when I recorded most of this session, I thought it would be a fun kind of journey to take with everyone to like pull the Spark 2.0 out of the box, the Sweet 35 out of the box, and I had only been using it for minutes when I shot that first session. So I was kind of learning as I was going too. But I love the Sweet Optics because there's just a really sweet spot of focus, and the outer edges are a really soft blur that I think pairs really well with portraiture and just childhood, kind of the magical, emotive kind of, you know, emotions that I want to evoke in my portraiture.
Yeah, that's really powerful. And you can get that from so many different options too, right? Because it's not necessarily, like we mentioned, just about one thing. It's about trying and experimenting. And you mentioned yourself, like using that Spark 2.0 for the first time, you were like, I don't necessarily get this, but challenging yourself to move through it.
Yeah.
One of the questions that popped up here is, how do you, actually, here's a really great question from Leela, and then I'll ask the next one. That was my question that I'm curious about, but is it Layla? I'm sorry, I wish I knew.
Maybe Layla, it looks like maybe Layla.
Yeah, how do you determine when to convert to black and white? I think that is an amazing question.
So I used to very early on in my photography journey, I would, you know, do every image in color and black and white. And, you know, it was just kind of like a habit. And then I started to realize not every image looks good in black and white. So I really started exploring kind of how to see the world in black and white. And for a good black and white image, you have to have the right kind of light. You need a high contrast light. So like a side light, a Rembrandt lighting, a harsh pocket of light, but anything with a high contrast of highlights. You know, you've got the highs and the mids and the lows, and there's a wide, you know, tonal contrast will convert beautifully to black and white.
Yeah, great tips, great tips. How do you, as you're in this and you're shooting and you're capturing these moments, how do you kind of, I think about this often, right? We are so much in control of guiding our subjects and kind of creating with them. It's this dance, if you will.
Yeah.
Especially when you're working with your children. I know that you mentioned briefly in the presentation, but for those who perhaps missed it, how do you really guide them? Do you have to bribe them? Do you have to give them candy? Like, what does it take to really get your child subject to to be interested and be a part of that journey with you?
That's probably one of my top asked questions, that people ask me is, your kids listen so well, my kids would never do that, or how do you get your kids to listen? And I'm always really honest that there are times when my kids want nothing to do with my camera. And there are times, like for this Lensbaby conference, it was like kind of an important, thing that I was specifically shooting for. And so I did offer my girls, we did like a hot chocolate Starbucks drive-through date as a reward for this. But really, I've learned that my kids enjoy the process more if it's less of me barking orders at them, or, kind of not really being in the moment with them. They enjoy it a lot less. So when I'm allowing them to help collaborate with me for ideas, and then the big thing was showing them the end result. I went through a long season where I would take the picture and then they were kind of out of the picture. I would post-process, post to Instagram, post to all the different places, and then they never saw the end result of this creative process we had worked on together. So now that they're able to see that, they're more excited to be a part of it, because they kind of get to be a part of the whole creative process of like creating, and then seeing the end result. And to answer your question, how I kind of guide my subjects is, I'm constantly thinking about those 4 elements I talked about in my presentation, which are light, emotion, movement, and story. So I'm constantly just kind of asking myself questions to kind of stay curious and in the moment, and really guide my subjects to kind of create a cohesive, I guess, just vision of what I want to create. So if the emotion is one of wonder or curiosity, I might have them reach out to touch something. Or if I'm, trying to capture a sense of wonder, I might have my daughter spin and twirl. So I'm just constantly asking myself questions and trying to stay curious about the moment and really stay in the moment.
Yeah, that's a great way to step into it. Sometimes the best agenda is having no agenda, right?
Yeah.
And as I've read these comments all day, and especially in this course, we're having people do something really beautiful, and that's discovering that there is so much more to Lensbaby than what meets the eye. And we've had countless people say, I've never been interested in portraits, and now I can't wait to go and take some. What's your journey been like as a photographer to really step into this niche and determine how you want to exist and be seen as a photographer?
Yeah, I think it's like that quote that I said at the beginning of my presentation, and now I don't remember the author of the quote, but it's don't shoot what a moment looks like, shoot what it feels like. And there's a lot of lenses that I'll put on my camera, and they're all tools, but I'm using the lens and it's just not kind of really matching what I'm feeling in the moment. And so as a photographer / artist, I really want to create work that makes, first and foremost, me feel something, like I'm infusing my heart into my art. And then I'm also wanting to make the viewer feel something, because that's why part of the reason we create art is to, I guess, share a message or share a story, or, in a small way, try to maybe make somebody feel something or think differently, or view childhood or whatever it is we're capturing in a different way. So I love that Lensbaby allows me to shoot how a moment feels. And if you haven't ever tried Lensbaby, I really do. I just highly recommend it. If you want to shoot portraits or any genre with more emotion and mood, Lensbaby does so much of the work for you, and it just allows you to really shoot how a moment feels. And that is my main goal as a photographer and artist.
That's a really beautiful testimony. And Dana, we're running out of time, but I do want to ask one more question, because this popped in the feed and I think it's really beautiful. From Shelly, do you plan the vision for a shoot, or does it emerge while you are in the moment?
It's a really good question. So another one of my favorite quotes, I love quotes, is by Elizabeth Gilbert. And she says, I said in the presentation, her quote is to, now I'm going to go blank because I'm on the spot, but to stay inspired, stay curious is the gist of her quote. And so, really as a photographer, because I'm mostly photographing my own children and kind of creating fine art out of my children's lives and kind of moments throughout our day,
sometimes the vision I'm creating is within that moment. I just try to stay curious throughout the day of moments or emotions or different interactions with my kids or beautiful light that really inspires me. I just try to stay curious about what's happening around me. And then other times I'm kind of bogged down with the responsibility of motherhood, of trying to, you know, run my own business, of a worldwide pandemic, of, you know, homeschooling my 5 kids. And it just feels like sometimes I don't have the margin. So something will catch my attention and I actually will make a note on my phone about this pretty light in this corner of my home, or maybe something I saw my kids do, like my older son playing the guitar and my youngest daughter was really, you know, connected to the moment with her brother. And so in my mind, I'm like, okay, there's something I'd really love to remember and create something from that. So I'll go back to that beautiful pocket of light and recreate that really authentic story that's true to our family, but recreate that vision at a later time when the light is beautiful again, or I've got more margin in my life to actually sit and take photos.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Dana, thank you so much. Shoot Extraordinary Conference. Thank you guys for being here. Day one's been absolutely incredible. And there's still more to come. Craig and I are going to leave you with a little bit of something in just a moment. Please do us a favor, leave a comment, leave a like, share this. If you are just catching the end of this, it's going to re-air. It'll be on Facebook and YouTube all day. And then at the end of the week, we'll be putting it on our website. Please go follow Dana. She was absolutely amazing, as well as all of our speakers. And we will see you guys in just a little bit. Thank you, Dana.
So much. It was such an honor to be part of this.
Thank you. See you guys in a little bit.